What do you feel when you look at the work of other photographers? Do you feel like their work is somehow just better than yours? Do you think their edit is better, their models are more beautiful, their location is just more unique, and overall their photographs, they just look nicer than yours? Have you ever thought like, what camera is this guy using? What lens does he use? Or even what film stock is he using? And most importantly, how can I take photos like these? And if this sounds like you, you're probably not alone. The truth is, most photographers think that in order to take better photographs, they need better gear. And I believe to a certain extent, this is kind of true. So, for example, if you want to take a very bokeh-heavy portrait, you probably need a lens with like an aperture of 1.4 or 1.8 and maybe a prime lens. So you get this really nice and crisp bokeh. If you want to take film photographs, you obviously need a film camera. If you want to shoot in the dark, again, you might need a fast lens or a flash. And if you want to take photographs like Joel Meyerowitz or Joe Greer, you probably need a Leica. No, I'm just kidding, but I think you get what I'm saying here. We always come up with some sort of excuse, like what we need in order to take better photographs. Well, you might be thinking this is the reason that their photographs are better than yours. They just have the right gear. But what you really should ask yourself is, why are their photographs better than yours? Do you really think their photographs are better because of the gear they're using? Or might it be something else? If this sounds like you, then I can guarantee you that I've been there a couple of times in my career as a photographer. This year, I've taken over 6,000 photographs on my film cameras. When I look back at this huge amount of photographs, I can confidently say that all of my favorite photographs have nothing to do with the gear that I was using. And I discovered once again that a great photograph is not made from the gear that you're using. Because in fact, almost every single one of these photographs were taken with this little point and shoot camera. I know it says Leica on here, but essentially you can pick this camera up for like 150 bucks. So it's really not a fancy camera. So in this video, I want to talk about what really makes a great photograph and what techniques you can use to make your photographs look better or at least more interesting. So if you watch this video till the very end, you will be able to take better photographs no matter what camera you're using. And once you understand how these techniques work, it will change the way you look at the world and it will change the way you take photographs forever. What's good, guys? Welcome back to the channel. For everyone who's new, my name is Tobias. I'm a 32-year-old freelance photographer based out of Cologne, Germany. And I take photographs for over 10 years now. And for over 7 years now, I'm taking photographs for clients around the world. And I've worked for some incredible clients. And even if I call this my full-time job, I still love taking photographs just for myself. Everywhere I go, I always have a camera with me at all times. I remember in 2015, I started taking photographs in the streets when I was traveling. And a few years later, I would meet up with friends and we started taking portraits together. And this eventually ended up being my full-time job, so I get paid to take photographs of people. And in 2020, when the pandemic hit and all my travels got cancelled and luckily refunded, I started to shoot film and I got my hands on the Leica M6. Shortly after, I bought the Leica M7 and I would spend all my money on films and gear and lenses and everything I was just seeing online from the work of other photographers. I was always thinking, how can I take photographs like them? I know it's very exciting to look at the work of other photographers and really thinking about their work and being like, how do they work? Like, what is the camera they're using? And how can I learn from this? I know it's very exciting to get your hands on new gear. And I had so much fun experimenting with new lenses, new gear and new films. And I believe it is a very important process to go through all of this and to really figure out what camera works best for you. But if I'm completely honest with you, and I think every great photographer would tell you the same, is that the gear is the least important thing when it comes to taking a good photograph. And I can admit for myself that all of my favorite photographs have nothing to do with the camera I was using. And to demonstrate this, I want to show you some photographs that I took this year with my Leica Z2X. So why do you think these photographs look nice? Why do I think these photographs look nice? Well, as I mentioned before, it doesn't come down to the camera itself. It has to be something different. And these photographs, once again, have nothing to do with the camera I used, but they have everything to do with the true essence of photography: light, composition, and motive. Photography is the study of light. This is a quote that I recently picked up from the masterclass of Annie Leibovitz, one of the greatest portrait photographers of our time, I would say. And what she's saying is that light is truly the most important thing in a photograph. Well, light is responsible for the brightness in a photograph, obviously, but it also controls, for example, if a photograph looks dramatic or cinematic to you. Light also controls all of the colors in the photograph. And this is something that I got to learn the hard way, because I remember taking digital photographs back then, digital photographs of my friends and portraying them. And I was always taking care of the background somehow and not really like on where the light was coming from. But then later on, when editing the photographs, I learned that I just can't fix the colors if there is no light. So if there's no light in the picture, there's no colors. And I really want to point this out. So light is not only the warmth in a photograph, whether it's sunset or sunrise, but most importantly, it controls all the colors in the photograph and the vibrancy of the colors, whether they're super saturated or very flat. And just from telling you all of the things that light can do for your photograph, it is really essential to learn how light works. Because light not only gives vibrancy to the colors or brightness to the image, it also draws your attention, not only in color photography, but also in black and white. And light can make a photograph feel dramatic or contrasty or even very harmonic and flat. I know there's some cases when you can change the light, for example, when you take portraits in the studio, but oftentimes, for example, in street photography or when you shoot landscapes, you can't really change the light that much. And therefore, it's very important that you think about at what time you want to take photographs. The obvious answer is during sunrise or sunset, because then the colors are just way more nice. I get it. But you can also take some very nice photographs in midday sunlight, where the light is very harsh. You can use that light going through a window or bouncing off of some wall. And you can play around with this light, which in the first place doesn't look any good. And I want to show you some photographs that I took this year that emphasize the point of how to use light in your photographs. So this is a photograph I took in Mallorca this year, and you can really see that the sun is already very low. You can see the long shadows and also some kind of warmth in the frame. And since the sun is very low already, you can really see the light playing some sort of ping pong in the frame and brightening up the entire photograph by also giving some sort of reflections in the window. The next photograph I took this year on my way to the Coachella Festival. So this is in Indio, California, close to the Joshua Tree National Park. And this must be very early in the morning. I remember driving to the festival area very early in the morning. And you can really see that this soft morning light is not only brightening up the entire scene, but also giving some sense of early morning. And I love how the palms look in this photograph. I love the long shadows on the street, and I especially love the warm tones of the mountains in the background. And this photograph was taken on the very same trip when going back from LAX to Germany. And what you can see in this picture very good is how the light warms up the entire scene, and at the same time giving some sort of cinematic look to the frame, because it is only coming from one side, obviously. So this is something that automatically looks very cinematic if the light is only coming from one side. So these are 3 photographs that I took this year on my travels, and I think they really point out how light is, changing the entire scene and how it is affecting the whole mood in the photograph. So if you want to master light, this is the tips that I would give you. Understand what good light means. And by this I mean it doesn't always need to be sunrise or sunset. Good light is good when it complements your photograph. So for example, when you want to take a very sensual and harmonic photo of someone, you can use soft light. But if you want to take more dramatic photographs, for example, you can also use very contrasty and hard light. So now let's talk composition and framing. Photography is about finding out what can happen in the frame. When you put 4 edges around some facts, you change those facts. This is a quote by Gary Winogrand, also one of the great street photographers of our time. Winogrand was known for his black and white street photographs, especially in cities like New York. And what Winogrand is saying in this quote, essentially, is that composition really has the ability to craft a photograph. So you probably know the feeling of going out with a friend and taking photographs together. And you guys are standing in front of the same scene, so you would imagine that both of you take the same photograph. But in fact, you're not. So your photographs look different from one another. How is that? Well, mostly because of the composition and the framing. So I remember when I took portraits back then in 2019 and doing my baby steps, and I would always place the model in the center of the frame. The photos looked just super balanced to me. They were easy to consume and they were surprisingly good on Instagram back then. Back then I was focusing more on the light and how to interact with the model. And it took me some time to figure out how to confidently play around with composition and framing. But it changed my photography for the better. This is a photograph I took this year on my trip to Lake Garda in Italy. And I think this photograph is a great example of how composition can work. Composition really is bringing so much to your photograph. It makes the photograph look more interesting. It enables you to look at a photograph for a longer period of time without being bored by it, essentially. And you can see it in this photograph very nicely because the building on the right side is kind of dividing the photograph in two parts, also the dark shadow beneath it. But at the same time, you have a boat in the foreground, just the front of the boat. You have also a tiny boat in the background and even the mountains in the background. So there's so much going on in this frame. And I could have just, taken a photograph of the boat in the back, but just by framing it in this way, I think makes the photograph look so nice. The next photograph I took this year in Madrid, not very long time ago. I love the colors in this photograph, but I think it also shows that, there is different subjects in this frame. And I tried to make the olive, this tiny olive, kind of the main subject. I think for many people it might be the hand with the cigarette, but I intentionally decided to, move the hand a little more to the side of the frame as well as the glass and really, make the olive the hero in this photograph. So what composition can do is also, make unobvious and, for example, tiny things the main character in a frame and just draw some attention to the photograph by how you position things in a frame. And the last photograph is a photograph that I took this year in Lanzarote. I intentionally decided to place the flowers and the chair on the side of the frame, also to give some sort of, depth, so I could include the sea in the photograph, but also to, have some sort of the same effect as in the first photograph from Italy. So the wall of the house is kind of dividing the frame into parts. I think the photograph just looks way more interesting because the chair and the flowers are so tiny compared to the big sea in the background. And you really have to look out for them, sort of. It's a little hard to explain, but I really like how this photograph came out. So I want to give you guys some tips in how you can enhance your composition and your framing in your photographs. Be playful with composition. There is really no right or wrong. I see people doing it in a very extreme way and sometimes a little too much maybe, but just playing around and experimenting with different compositions is really making your photograph so much more interesting, and at the same time will bring you so much joy when taking photographs. So one thing you can try out, for example, is to using the 1/3 rule, which is essentially dividing the frame into 1/3 and just placing objects in different parts of the frame. And one thing I love to do myself very much is, for example, to play around with the whole environment around you. So maybe having things in the foreground, having things in the background, giving some sort of depth into the frame, or maybe standing behind a lantern in the street and using it, to cut your frame into half, or as I was showing you in my photographs, maybe using a wall to, divide your frame into different parts. Lastly, let's talk motive and moment. To me, photography is an art of observation. It's about finding something interesting in an ordinary place. I found it has little to do with the things you see and everything to do with the way you see them. This is a quote by the great Elliot Erwitt. one of the greatest street photographers, in my opinion, to this day. And I think what he's saying also has something to do with composition, but I think it also has something to do with a fact that a lot of us seem to forget about photography. And is that photography, unlike painting, for example, is happening outside. So you can't just sit at your desk and, paint a picture. You have to be outside and photographing. And I see it all the time, for example, when I look at the work of other photographers. As I said before, I'm jealous myself sometimes of the motives that other photographers take pictures of. And I would, at first think, why is the photograph so nice? Is it the camera? Is it the lighting? Is it the model? But essentially what really makes the photograph so nice is just the motive. So this photograph is so great just because the photographer went outside and captured it. It might be because of the lighting as well and because of the composition, but essentially what enables him to take the photograph is just the fact that he, went outside his doorstep and took the photograph. And this might sound a little stupid even, but it is really a fact that life is happening outside. So if you want to take photographs, for example, in the streets, you have to be outside. It doesn't matter if you think about what camera is the best for you, sitting at your desk, at your home. You have to be outside. You have to be practicing and taking photographs where life is happening. I see it in street photography all the time. I see it in travel photography all the time. Some photographs, they are great because the photographers, took the time, invested the money, and just went somewhere to take the photographs. And you really have to do that yourself. So if I could recommend something to you as a tip, it would be don't buy the expensive camera you always wished for, but rather go on a trip and bring your cheaper camera with you. So when you look at this photograph, for example, it's a photograph I took this year in Venice in Italy. I love the even framing here, so like having a clear horizon in the background with the houses. But the moment I waited for this guy coming from a wedding, I think, with these tiny flowers in his hand, and I waited for him to enter my frame, it really makes the photograph more interesting, while also giving some sense of, who's this guy, where's he coming from, why is he wearing a suit. The second photograph is also a photograph I took on the very same trip to Venice, and it shows some old couple sitting at a restaurant being served by some waiter. And the long exposure, I think, makes it very interesting. Without the waiter in the frame, I think it just would be a little more, intimate. But since the waiter just enters the frame, it looks a little, more hectic and lively, and it just makes the photograph a little more interesting to me. And this is a photograph I took this year in Miami, which is also, pointing out the importance of the moment that you're photographing. And it's essentially a basketball flying through the frame, but you don't see who's throwing the ball. You just see the ball flying around. And to me, this really makes the photograph more interesting, way more interesting than if you would see the player throwing the ball. If you just see the ball in the frame, it's like, okay, where's it coming from? It's sort of sparking some interest. I would recommend you bringing your camera wherever you go, because when you bring your camera intentionally, it really sharpens your eyes. Like, having a camera by your side will help you to notice different things. This is what helped me a lot back then when I just brought my camera everywhere I went. And I always was, on the lookout for some interesting thing to photograph. Especially when you pursue street photography, it's very easy to just bring your camera and just, sort of be on the hunt the entire day. Another tip that I can give is try to find beauty in the mundane things. So for example, even when you're just at home, sometimes the light is, falling nicely through the kitchen window, or when you spend time with your family, maybe some moments occur and some interesting things happen right in front of your eyes. So just be open and learn how to see. Never stop, searching for photographs. This is really what I can give you as one of the biggest lessons that I've learned from taking photographs for so many years now. When you take one great photograph per year, you're lucky. This is what some well-known photographers say, and I never really understood it because, when I would finish a shoot, I would always, end up with a couple of photographs that I liked. But if you're completely honest, and when you consider all of the things that I just talked about, to have a really, really great photograph that is made out of different aspects, that has great lighting, that has a great composition, and maybe even a great moment, is very rare. And I want to show you a photograph from John Meyerowitz, who I was talking about before. And it's a photograph that he took in 1975 in New York City. And this photograph has a very interesting motive. It's just, you know, people walking through the dust of New York, very New York-like. At the same time, it has very nice lighting. The composition also, you know, you might be just seeing the couple walking through the dust, but at the same time, they're casting shadows on the people on the right side. So there is really multiple things to consider when looking at this frame. And I think it's one of his greatest photographs for these various reasons. So I know this seems like a lot to learn, but I can just encourage you guys to be brave and start to, you know, take photographs in a different way that you maybe did before. For me, it was very helpful to look at the work of other photographers. And I would recommend not only looking at their work on Instagram, but rather get your hands on some of their photo books, for example. It is just way more enjoyable to look at their photographs and their whole body of work when you hold it in your hands and when you can really take the time to dive into their work. I can guarantee you there is so much to learn in intentionally looking at the photographs of the great photographers and really understanding in why this photograph essentially is so great. You can really start to practice how they use light, composition, and motive in their photographs. And if you need some inspiration on photo books, for example, I do have a video on my channel which is about color photography books of some of my favorite photographers, so feel free to check that out. And if you enjoyed the photographs that I showed to you in this video, I have a very special announcement because I decided to put out a photo calendar for this year, and it contains 13 of my favorite images from the entire year. So I went through 6,000 images and picked my 13 favorite photographs from the entire year. So if you're interested in checking out the calendar, it's linked down in the description. So this is by far the best way to support me and my work. So if you found this video helpful in any way, thank you so much for watching. Thank you for visiting the shop, and I see you in the next one. Take care, guys.